Hi there. Can you?
Hi.
Hi. Oh, good. I was like, oh no, not some Mercury retrograde.
Ah.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good, and I'm really happy to be doing this with you both.
Well, we just kind of start.
Okay, you guys are like my jam. This sounds like improvisational theater or something.
Kind of.
Yeah. So, welcome
to
another episode of
As
Woo As
You
Want with
Celine,
Jeremiah, and we're incredibly honored and kind of just shocked.
Yep, totally.
And like beyond, beyond joyful to have the one, the only, Tosha Silver.
Oh my goodness. God.
So well, Tosha, you haven't listened to any of these, have you?
No, I just think the title's hilarious. And Jeremiah is as I was saying before we got online, he's like a family member. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, you're like my spiritual mama, Tosha, and I feel like you're honestly the spiritual mama for like my whole family. So you're absolutely family as well. Well, for the people who have been listening, this is kind of full circle.
Yes,
in a really funny way.
You peaked here. You're peaking.
It's all downhill.
Yeah, it's all just.
Well,
hilarious.
it's so funny because, our first episode we talk about kind of how we got into, quote, woo-woo stuff, spirituality, all this, occult, whatever. And for me, it was you, Tosha. When I had my first reading with you 12 years ago, which I realized was the beginning of this whole Jupiter cycle that's actually just ending, which makes complete sense. I mean, the whole thing is kind of crazy. You really opened me in so many ways, and I think the most important way, and I feel like a huge piece of your work is how much you emphasize listening on the inside.
Yes.
Listening to your intuition, and that the wisdom, everyone always looks outside for the answer, for the power, for whatever, and you really taught me that that's all comes from the inside.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. In a way, while I love, because I'm so irreverent, I love making fun of, the whole topic of quote unquote woo woo. But truthfully, when you get down to the essence of it, it's the way we would all live if the culture wasn't insane. Because the premise of it isn't anything out of the ordinary. The premise of it is everything that supports nature. It basically says you listen on the inside, you act according to your true nature, you don't adapt your nature to popular opinion, the insides will show you. And so you kind of think, well, what, the way that's trivialized by the culture, I think, is just because the feminine is trivialized. It's the feminine and the masculine that, we all have both inside of us. And it's just the way that inner knowing, which to me is connected to the divine feminine, is just trivialized in a culture that doesn't understand it. Yeah. So probably not the answer that you expected, but that's really how I see that with the intuition. It's the listening to that great I within.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love for you to just give us a little bit of your background. For anyone who's familiar with your work, they probably are relatively familiar with it. But for those who aren't, because I know that there are people who listen to us who know your work, there are people who don't. So if you'd be open to just sharing a little bit about your path.
Well, I mean, let's see. I met you, like you were saying, 12 years ago, back when I was still doing readings.
Yeah.
And Well, basically, I had about 30 years from the time when I got out of college thinking I was going to become a writer into the next 30 years where almost by accident I fell into giving various kinds of intuitive readings, including astrology, um, over a period of 30 years, partly because I just started doing them in a spontaneous way because I was obsessed with the world of astrology, but I had no intention of having it become my life path. And then it was all word of mouth, and one thing led to another. And meanwhile, the deeper assumption about my life was just that I was going to write. Kind of fell by the wayside because I found it really hard to do both. And so at some point after, I guess it was around 2012, I stopped giving readings altogether and started to teach and write. And really what was happening is that even though I had made a living from helping people in that way, I guess you could say the deeper impetus was to really help people connect to this inner divine, which to me is very interchangeable with the intuition. So even though I loved astrology and I still do, and I still write about it a little and teach it some, the real focus of all the books I've written have had nothing to do with that. They've really had to do with how do you follow this force of the divine? Because all those years of giving all those thousands of readings, the thing I was really noticing is that it just didn't matter in the end what people's charts were and what their transits were. Over and over and over, they'd been taught to not listen and to not honor their own knowing and to not hear that inner divine. And so that really became what books I've written have been about.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, Tosha runs her own online community called Living Outrageous Openness Forum, which is named after her first book, Outrageous Openness. I have 3 of your books sitting right in front of me right now.
He does.
But I'm a fanboy. But in those, you do weekly calls with that forum, right?
Yeah, they do. I do weekly Q&A calls, and it's been running for about 4 years now. There's people from all over the planet that log on to the calls or just get them later when we send them out after each call. And because I think that this focus you can especially see it, like the most recent book is called It's Not Your Money, and the focus of each of these books has really been about how do you live this in a practical way. Like a lot of this stuff sounds like a really nice idea, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to follow my inner heart and I'm going to, it's all theoretically a very nice idea, but in a culture that doesn't honor that, it really, by the time I wrote the most recent book, it really became, here's an 8-week program for how to learn to not only really listen on the inside, but to actually let this force of love take over. So it's not just the ego going crazy, trying to make things happen and chase everything like a lunatic, but there's actually something greater on the inside that's guiding things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I bring up the forum because, I actually took that It's Not Your Money initial course.
Were you in that?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's...
It came at quite a crucial time for me, but in those calls, the reason I brought up the forum and everything, not only to let people know about it, but also because usually at the beginning of your calls or your classes, like when you came to Dumbo in Brooklyn, my mom and I came, and I remember that. Yeah, before you talk, you'll always kind of give a brief kind of astrological forecast.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think it's always interesting the way you frame it, where it's like you're kind of setting up the scene for what's occurring right now, but that's not a deterministic
Yes.
scene. It's just kind of like it's the forecast.
It's the emotional weather.
Right. That's we interviewed an astrologer who called it the emotional weather. So
yeah. I mean, and I think the thing is I like viewing it as context, and then in a sense, it really lifts people out of that idea of astrological victimization, which I think can, depending on the sites you go to, can be rampant. Like, well, this is happening, and this is how you're going to feel, and this is, why you should be worried. And it's like, well, actually, when you're learning how to align yourself with something greater than the egoic mind, then the transits come and go, and you can be focusing on holding the center connected to the inside, regardless of the outer weather. So,
right,
the transits stop being something to fear.
Right, and something to
even
flow.
though they can get kind of wild.
They can.
Do you have anything to say about this recent eclipse? It's been double eclipse. Situation.
Mostly that, the one yesterday was a lunar eclipse, and it was opposing Saturn and Pluto both, which, to me are lords of karma. They're Pluto is related to Scorpio, and it's related to death and rebirth, and Saturn is the lord of time and karma. And so to me that eclipse is an ending of sorts. I mean, they all are. We get 2 or 3 lunar eclipses every year, but this particular one with that opposition is a big ending, even though, we don't necessarily see yet what is ending. Sometimes it takes 30 days out from the eclipse. Sometimes it takes 3 months or 6 months. But, that eclipse happens to be on top of my sun in Capricorn. So it to me, a lot of these also depend on your individual chart and how they're impacting you. And they might impact one person really strongly because it's so tied in to the chart, and somebody else might be like, I don't feel this at all because it's just not activating them. So, again, I think that it's so helpful to do all the stuff that's in the books. I don't know. It's how I live. They're not just concepts to me. I learned to live this way in order to have some peace and not be driven crazy by an obsessive mind. And I think the people that find these books, they write all the time, and they say, wow, I finally am learning to live with some equanimity and openness to what is and to what is possible. And so I just apply it to the eclipses. Like, it's great to know, but if you're using a lot of these concepts and you say, let what needs to come, let what needs to go, and show me the right actions that are for the highest good and for the good of the planet to be taking right now, because everything's based on offering. So here I am with the eclipse sitting on top of my sun, and that's basically what I'm saying. Like, let it unfold for the highest and use me according to your will.
One of these channels that I follow a lot is named Bashar, and he has this really good sentence that is, circumstances don't matter, state of being does.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's totally aligned with kind of your whole, philosophy and stuff. Like, whatever's happening outside of yourself is important, but really the key is how you're able to be like transformative and present for yourself. Right?
Yes, yes, totally agree. And it's kind of weird, but somebody pointed this out to me recently. I don't know if you ever followed the Stoics of Rome, like Marcus Aurelius, but the Stoics were sort of misunderstood as people that they were just like, well, expect the worst and then you won't be disappointed. But that's really not what they said. What they actually said a lot was, what you were just saying, that you have often not that much control over the outer circumstances. Sometimes you do, and then you're shown the actions to take, but sometimes you don't. But what you really have power about is learning some mastery over the mind. And I approach it, a somewhat different way because I think I'm devotional by nature. So I like this idea that all seemed very cold to me, like just master the mind and all will be well. It
Right.
seemed very sort of patriarchal and,
Yeah.
empty to me. But the general idea, I would say, can be approached through devotion. That there's this thing that runs through all the books about how, well, I guess one way I would say it is that as you learn to befriend the mind and as you learn to befriend the inner child and all these parts that are trying to like take over and rule things through panic and fear, that as you befriend those parts, that's actually the way that the inner divine presents herself or himself, is the inner divine comes through building this inner friendship.
Wow. That's so interesting.
It's so comforting.
Isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Very like powerful and nurturing.
Yeah. And it's nurturing, not in that, I was in a couple different spiritual groups over the years. And, back in especially in my 20s and 30s. And I was finding that, the groups were just like, surrender, just do it. Right. Meditation, just do it, and it was a little bit like a military camp. And, in retrospect, all of that now seems very in that patriarchal mindset of make it happen, do it now, and bringing all of that kind of, force into the spiritual life, which really then becomes one more stressor. Right. Mm-hmm. And everybody was looking at everybody else. Oh, well, they meditated twice today and I only meditated once. And is she surrendering better than I am? Who's the best Swami? And, all of it was like, oh, my God. And then this route of learning, to let this inner devotion guide the way, it just started to dismantle all of that really... There was, this idea even of how do you surrender. A lot of it happens through invitation and offering as opposed to pushing and forcing, which is the opposite. Like you can't surrender by forcing yourself to surrender. It doesn't work.
Yeah. And going back to your point about, I'd mentioned in our correspondence before we got on the podcast, but Celine is a triple Capricorn.
Oh, yes.
So,
oh, that's amazing.
Yes.
So,
what day are you? Wait, not to capsize this, but what day are you?
Born?
Yeah.
January 3rd.
Oh, okay. So you're earlier. That's great. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, not at all. But just going back to the practical approach that you employ, I think is a huge part of what kind of drew me to you and to your work. And, particularly with It's Not Your Money, I feel like a lot of your tools have crystallized in a way. And money, I like I said, I'd been talking with you and practicing your work. I have Outrageous Openness, your first book. I have Change Me Prayers, your second book. I don't have Make Me Your Own, but I will get it at some point. These are all of Tosha's books, by the way. You can find them at toshasilver.com. But her latest book, It's Not Your Money, when we did that initial course in 2017, you have a section in the book where you talk about the 3 stages of surrender.
Yeah.
And I read that and I was like, holy shit. Like, this is basically, I was just like so happy that you wrote that out because I was like, whoa, that is definitely what my path has been. And it was money and the practical nature of money, like literally paying your rent or food or whatever every month or whatever. Using your tools with the practicality of your money supply really, really like hit the core of what surrender meant, at least for me. So I say that to celebrate your ability to allow people to learn how to really get to that place, because it's not, like you said, it's not something where you just can force yourself to surrender. It really takes a bunch of different you teach about a bunch of different techniques, and we can go into that. I'd love to actually go into it a little bit, but
well,
yeah.
I wonder. I'm really glad that you're bringing up that part about the 3 stages of offering of surrender, because I think it's. I'm just really glad you zeroed in on that, because I think it's maybe a topic that gets misunderstood a lot. So maybe can I say something about what you just mentioned? Because,
absolutely.
Well, okay. So in the book, there's this part, and it's basically, because offering, the way that, to me, genuine surrender happens isn't just from telling somebody to do it or having somebody beat themselves up because they can't do it, which is what happens a lot. That this act of offering, where you take a burden, you take a problem, and you really hand it back to this force of love, to divine, and you're really saying, okay, I can't do this my way anymore. I'm really giving this to you to be shown the right actions and the right unfolding at the right time. But there's 3 different levels of that. That's what Jeremiah's talking about. And so the first level is kind of no surrender. I mean, it's pretty much the way we're taught to teach, to live in this culture, which would just be like, everything's mine. I want what I want. If I'm not getting it, I must be doing something wrong. Let me either beat myself up or try harder, or just be mad at the world because it's not coming. And that's level 1. And I would even say that a good portion of law of attraction, when life is only about law of attraction, I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to manifest it, it's not coming, why isn't it coming? That all can be level 1. Not that there aren't parts of law of attraction that are true, because there are parts that are true. But level 2 is often when people get an intellectual interest in surrender. And it's often because they're suffering. They're like, I'm trying to manifest this. I'm chasing my ass all over the place. Why isn't it coming? I don't know what to do. And so they start to think, well, maybe I should call in this force of love to help. But at level 2, everything is still seen as belonging to the ego. So the money's, I need this, I need my rent paid, I need work that makes me feel better, I need a partner, whatever. It's still like mine. I want, and I'm calling in God or the divine, kind of like a helper or a valet. Mm-hmm. So, like to say, I'm saying, okay, this is all mine, but I need your assistance in getting what I want. And a lot of spiritual practices stay at level 2. And right. In fact, there's a whole lot of spiritual groups out there that are completely based in level 2. Like, let's just help you get more of what you want in life. But there is a level 3, and that's really where I would say the books I do are based. And at level 3, the my starts to dissolve. Mm-hmm. And that's where life gets really, really different. And it starts to become, that's really the title of the book. It's not your money. It wasn't just like a cute thing to say. It's like you really start to go into the awareness that everything actually belongs to this force of love, not just as a concept, but as a reality, because if I got hit by a car today, nothing would come with me. Mm-hmm. If I left the planet. It's like none of it is ours. And once we really get that at a deep level, this level of surrender and offering becomes very embodied and almost exciting, because you're like, well, if it is not mine, then you're really turning to that force of love and saying, you can use me in any way you want. You kind of become like the chess piece that can go in any direction on the board, mm-hmm. because you're saying it's not mine. It's not mine. I'm here to be used, as opposed to how can I use the universe to get more of what I want, which is level 2.
Right. You're essentially flipping it.
you're flipping it. And what's funny is I think level 3 kind of comes on its own, and these also, you shift. I mean, life is flux, right? So it isn't like, oh, and then you're, embedded in level 3 and you get some, award and that's where you are. Like, you have a bad day and all of a sudden you're a raving lunatic at level 1 again, but you start to remember, oh, wait a minute. Actually, this isn't mine. Actually, I'm ready to be used as a force for good on the planet. Let me offer everything back to the divine, and you start to go into level 3 again.
Yeah. Yeah. And like a couple of the tools, well, we can go through there's a few things in It's Not Your Money. I do want to talk about a couple of really powerful tools in the book. One is, and this is stuff we've actually talked about on this podcast, so it's great to have someone who could, it's the horse's mouth, right? It's the person who I learned it from. But we've talked a lot about inner child work and uncourting work, and those are two incredibly powerful tools that I had no idea about. And when I started learning about them from you, it aligned with a lot of different other aspects in my life where I realized you become more energetically sensitive in a certain way, particularly with the courting stuff. And also with the inner child stuff, where it's like, if you drop down to that level 2, or I know it's not really a hierarchy, but if you go to level, or if you go to level 1 or level 2, a lot of times the tools that you write about, once you tap back into that and you use the tools that you're describing, you can bring yourself back to level 3.
That's very true. I mean, especially I would say with this work with the inner child, so often, the part that's saying, oh my God, I'm so scared that my needs aren't going to be met. I'm so scared that, I'll always be abandoned, or I'm so scared that I'll be neglected. That is so often not the adult. That is this part on the inside, which is young and vulnerable and rightfully terrified because it may well not have had its needs met when it was little. And so a portion of the book, not that this idea is novel, and there are many books out there that describe getting to know the inner child, but I think that the difference in It's Not Your Money is it's specifically for the purpose of, as your identity starts to become the one who's caring for the child, as opposed to being the child, like just being the one who's having the tantrum every day, actually becoming the one who's saying to that kid, I love you. I'm going to care for you. I'm not going to beat you anymore. I'm not going to torture you anymore. That as you become that, you actually get more and more anchored in that inner divine. And then, as you're saying, you start to trust letting yourself be in level 3. You don't need to grasp. All that level 1 and level 2 come out of the grasping and the clinging, often of the fearful child. So.
Yeah, and then with the uncourting stuff too, and I think with both of these, they're also tools for, as we were talking about, just tapping into your intuition. Particularly with the courting work, where you realize how much you can take on other people's energy, and it's hard to hear yourself because you have other people's kind of record players going on in your head and in your body.
It's true. I wasn't sure when I wrote the book, I really wasn't sure if I was going to include the courting part or not, because I was like, are people going to really understand this? Is this going to be too esoteric? And in fact, the things that, thousands of letters have come in since the initial course, and now especially since the book is out. And people that, again, as you would say, would normally not call themselves esoteric or woo-woo or any of that, they're going, I see a rope that has always connected me, say, to my father, that has always made me fearful of that I would just relive all my father's mistakes, or that rope has always made me feel scared of being myself, and that when I went in and took that rope off, and just send him love, but didn't need to be roped anymore from this other level, my whole life changed. And, these are people that are normally very, practical, I'm not into this stuff, and they're applying these tools. And I partly love that about this work, is that if what I've always felt is if you can describe this stuff in ways that are pragmatic enough, it really doesn't matter if somebody says, oh, yeah, I've been on a spiritual path for 30 years. It just doesn't matter. You just need something deconstructed in a practical enough way that somebody with curiosity can learn it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add?
No, I don't really. I mean, I know about you because of Jeremiah, and, I read It's Not Your Money. So I'm just sort of listening to the conversation without, it's not, I love the idea of surrendering and being back to like a wholeness and a divinity and that working through you. But it's just, I don't know. Sometimes I find it doesn't always resonate with me I don't know why. It's a difficult, it's not difficult. It's kind of like who then the divinity is working through you. You're taking on whatever's offered, you're accepting, you're allowing. But then like, what is the relationship between the personality self and the divinity self, and what is their relationship together? And maybe that's what's confusing to me, or
I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah, I would love to.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's something that gets misunderstood a lot because, I mean, I certainly know when I was in one of the to be nameless groups that I was in back decades ago, I now can look back and go, wow, there was almost this idea that there was a kind of spiritual regimentation that made it seem as if you would lose your personality, or even that you should. That, you meet people like that sometimes. They're like spiritual robots in a way.
Right. Yeah.
And, they just walk around with these kind of glazed smiles on their faces, and they're like, it's all good. They just heard somebody was raped. They're like, it's all good. She's working out her karma. And you're listening to this stuff, and you're like, are you out of your mind? Yeah. Like, really, are you out of your mind? Because to me, this is all a paradox. And so this, on the one hand, first of all, this force of the divine is not on the outside, right? It's not some, it's not some poltergeist or demon that takes over. It's not some guy in the sky who's sending thunderbolts. It's the great I on the inside that takes the lead. And so to me, there's these two presences on the inside. One is the me, which is the personality level, and it's beautiful. It's not there to be exterminated. Like, I see it like that's what makes each person unique. It's what makes each person that vital essence is the me personality. And then there's the great I, which to me is perhaps the soul level that has come through every incarnation. There's some essence which goes through all the different lives that is like the through line. And so really what starts to happen is the me is, in a way, begins to have the freedom to become even more itself, because you're no longer making other people your divine. You're no longer saying, oh, I'm here to please you. I'm here to like adapt myself so that hopefully you'll like me. The anchoring starts to happen on the inside in that great I, in that through line, that soul. And then the me starts to blend with it. Do you know what I mean? I would say that the me starts to serve the I. It's not about getting rid of it. Right. And I do think you see cults and you see groups where, yes, the purpose of it is for the me be, but sort of becomes some bizarro version of the teacher or something. And to me, it's a real misunderstanding of what this is.
Right. Well, it's about the ability to face your own inner godliness, and then you mesh with that, right? And then that
Exactly.
pushes you through to like being able to expand and ride the wave.
Exactly. But I really, like, when I first understood the idea of the me and the I, it really helped. Because you're like, they're both parts of your being. It's just that we live in a culture that only honors the me.
Right.
And it just says the small self. I don't even love that term, but, for lack of a better word, the ego mind is all that matters. If you can somehow get everything that it's telling you at once, you're going to get some kind of happiness, which then you find over and over, oh, what's going on? It's not actually bringing all that happiness. So the discovery of letting this greater I take the lead, then the me has a job. Like, the me has a fun job. It's like, well, the I is running the show, so then the me can just be itself.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that, because I think it's a really core thing to this work is that mediating between the two.
Yeah, I feel like Jeremiah and I kind of talk about that a lot.
Yeah, we do.
And that, yeah.
Well, and also the thing I was going to say about that is you can see how much we're really taught to overthink things, and that there's so many things that, like, I find this, like, they get understood through the intuition and through the body, and not so much through the mind, which, is funny to say to somebody that, is very intellectually based, but really, like, when you were saying, well, how do you figure this all out? Like, how does the me not lose its personality, but how does the I take over? And then you start to realize the mind can't work out this paradox. But the inner self knows how to work it out. Like, there's a line in the Money Book that just says, the way knows the way, even when you don't know how. The way knows the way. It's like that me, the more you're inviting in this force of love to take over, even when you say, I don't know what the hell to do next. I have no idea. I can't figure out this quandary, but intuitively show me the next step. That's when the way starts to take over the way.
I got that.
Yeah, Tosha, are you familiar with Seth?
That's so funny. I read the Seth books probably when I was in my 20s, Jane Roberts, and I love them. And they were maybe one of the very first, metaphysical things I ever read.
I think she was, though. I think those books were the first, like, big time on the market. Anyway, what are you going to say?
No. So
No.
I was just going to say. So
true.
Celine introduced me to the Seth book. So with all this stuff, I mean, everyone's coming from it from their own perspective with their own information or whatever. So when I read, there's a part in one of the Seth books where he talks about Framework 1 and Framework 2. And I feel like that's exactly the same thing, where Framework 1 is essentially the me,
the ego,
the egoic world.
Yeah.
And then the Framework 2 is this greater I situation happening where
bigger soul.
With the higher soul. And the whole idea of, like, he talks about, like, trusting that there's something greater kind of guiding you through it.
Yeah, I used to read those books like they were manna from heaven, because I
felt the same way.
I mean, it was funny. I think I was 22 or 23. Wow. It was like right around the time I was really learning astrology too, and I was like, holy God, man. Like, it was so, because I think when you're a certain kind of being, that there's an essential truth. I mean, I haven't read them in so many years. I don't like when you're saying that, it's pinging this little tiny part of my brain from a million years ago. But I remember feeling like I was reading something very familiar that some part of me knew. Yeah. To be so, and like, why wasn't anybody talking about this? And why wasn't this in Hebrew school? And I went, like, this was the stuff I needed, right?
It's the good stuff.
Yes,
this is the good stuff.
It's the good stuff.
100%. Well, I know you do have to go.
Yeah.
There's absolutely so much more we could talk about. I don't know, Tosha, if you wanted to, add anything, if you wanted to talk about It's Not Your Money a little bit more, if, talking about the Change Me prayer or, the cleaning. We can go through that. I'm more than happy to, but it's up to you and your schedule. I don't want to impede.
I think you're giving I think you guys are doing a great job giving a kind of overview. Either people are coming to your podcast that are familiar with this work, or they're going to be listening to this going, wow, this is kind of interesting. Let me go Google her, and they'll find it all pretty quickly. Because what I guess I find with this work is that people find it when they're ready. Mm-hmm. And that is just the deal. And the letters I've gotten have been so amusing to me, because somebody will say, like, my girlfriend gave me a copy of Outrageous Openness 4 years ago, and I put it in my bathroom behind the toilet because I had no interest in it. And then 4 years later, I was in a crisis, and I picked up the book and I read it in a day. And now I'm hysterically crying, writing to you because my whole life has changed.
I love that stuff.
That happens all the time with these books. And so I've kind of given up, any idea that I have to, sell them or convince anybody, or it's like people really get guided to them when the time is right. And often there's like a certain spectrum of people that find it because they're so exhausted by trying to manifest and control their whole lives and finding that it doesn't work for them. And they're so exhausted that they want another route. And so I'd say there's a big spectrum of people that come out of that. And then there's other people that they're just ready to move into a different level of consciousness that really comes from that surrender and offering, and then they find it. But it happens at the time that's right. And I never, someone said to me recently, well, aren't you hurt when someone says to you, yeah, I didn't see the value of your work for 5 years? And I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with me. It just wasn't the right time yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely gotten Outrageous Openness that's like one of my number one gifts for people.
Really?
For sure. And it's one of those things, like, I think when I was younger, I used to be like, just, surrender, offer this. And now I don't do that anymore because, I'll do it if people are open to it. But it is really one of those things where people aren't ready, or it's not even ready or not ready. It's like,
it's just reading the room.
Yeah, but it's also like maybe that's not what they want or need right now, like...
Right. It's like not the language or the terminology that resonates with them, when essentially it's all kind of the same idea, I think, at the end of the day, just said differently.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's something about people's paths. I mean, without this sounding like a platitude, people's paths really unfold at the rate that is needed. Mm-hmm. And that I'm trying to remember this thing I read the other day, but it was like a breakdown of the word love. And it was something like letting ourselves, it was basically that you give people the room to evolve at the rate that they're meant to. Right. Rather than telling them this is how it should be happening and you're somehow, making a mistake if you're not doing it the way I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. So I think that, that's basically a portion of the books is that if you listen on the inside, you'll know the rate of because you're no longer the one leading your spiritual evolution. I guess before we stop, that's one more point I'd like to make is that this isn't self-help by any stretch of the imagination. And it's one of the jokes to me of the universe that Amazon, always puts these books in the self-help section when they're actually the opposite. And that, no shade against the self-help movement. I know it's helped a lot of people's lives, but this isn't what this is. This is actually the divine takes the hell over. Mm-hmm. Sometimes quite painfully, because the ego is like, oh my God, what's going to happen if I'm not running everything? But when it's time for something greater than the ego mind to run things, people often find these books, and they very quickly say, wow, this has nothing to do with self-help. In fact, it's more that rigidity starts to dissolve so that the flow really shows what it needs as opposed to what we think should be happening. So it's like a greater agenda starts to guide things.
I think that's a pretty great way to end it.
Yeah. I will say, though, I loved your terminology of yourself when you're younger in It's Not Your Money, and you call yourself the Queen of Catastrophe, and that's me.
Oh my God. Well, as a triple Capricorn,
I know.
that makes sense.
Such a little nervous Nell, but also very relaxed. It's very confusing. Anyway, we can edit that out. I just wanted to tell her that.
You don't even have to edit that out. I think it's helpful because well, I won't tell you what to edit out. How about that? But as a Capricorn, what I think, I just have to say that because is that it's a little bit like, I think the more that Capricorn part just wants a job. That's how I see it. It's like it's ruled by Saturn and it needs something to do. Mm-hmm. And so it takes itself on like, all right, I'm just going to be hyper vigilant about everything to make sure everything unfolds the way it needs to. And at some point, that all that Saturn energy, you go, wow, I can give you another job. Like, thank you so much for what you're doing, but actually you haven't brought a lot of peace into my life. So you can like be hypervigilant about everything, but we'll also do this. Mm-hmm. And then I find that it calms down a lot because it likes being useful. And for me, the way it was useful was to turn my life into a living hell, thinking it was helping.
Yeah. Yeah. Capricorns. What are you gonna do?
It's a great sign.
I like it. Anyway.
Well, yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Tosha,
you so
much for
I'm so glad.
gracing us with your
I
presence.
said yes. It was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we're really excited to share it with everyone.
Yes.
We'll let you know when the episode comes out.
Yeah, thank you. It's weird because when you said, well, we just get on there and we just chat, and I was like, I used to do that with certain podcasts, and then I was like, all of a sudden they're like, so who are you going to vote for in 2020? And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what I'm here for. Like, I actually really need to talk about this work. So.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I hope we were able to share.
You were great. You were really great. So thank you. You're both terrific. And thanks for asking me.
Of course.
Thank you, Tosha.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
That was fun. I mean, full circle.
Yeah, that was full circle.
Right?
Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
I loved it.
Very cool. So, we hope everyone enjoyed that episode. Super awesome that Tosha.
He just made a great body convulsion movement.
Yeah,
it was wonderful.
Said yes and was on the podcast. Definitely check out her work, toshasilver.com. All her books are awesome. If you're not familiar with any of her work, just start with the first one, Outrageous Openness. It's a super easy read. It's just like a bunch of stories from her life and her clients' lives and friends' lives, and just showing these concepts of surrender and offering and how they play out in really fascinating ways.
I will say I loved talking with her for many reasons. She's amazing, but I loved understanding more of how she's coming from a feminine, divine, divinity energy.
Totally.
That I did not get from any of our discussions so far. And
interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like her discussion of like this like rigidity and this sort of like, you must do this right now, and like how that's so male patriarchy energy. And so she was like, nope, I'm going to try to flip it around and go from this like inner softness and surrendering. And so it was very, very enlightening for me.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
That's great. I was like hoping that you guys would interact too, because I knew that I could have easily dominated that whole
But I
conversation.
think it was good for you to do that, you know?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that was like your person, your start, you know, like I was just interested to listen.
Yeah.
So
But no, that was super cool.
Yeah.
And could have
I know,
gone
I
on
know.
for so long. I was very conscientious of making sure that we did go over.
Quick announcement.
Quick announcement. You may have noticed that this past Tuesday, the 16th of July, we didn't release a podcast.
Yeah.
We were planning on taking a break.
Yep.
And then this opportunity came up. So,
We were
surprise.
like, boom.
We're going to do this. But Celine and I are going to be taking a few weeks off.
Yep, to regroup, recharge.
Recharge, let the field lie fallow, which is one of my favorite sayings. It's kind of a biblical thing where, you know, as a farmer, every 7 years, the seventh year, you don't farm the field. You let the field grow so that the nutrients and the soil remains healthy.
Of course you would quote some, you know, biblical term.
So we're going to let the field lie fallow for a few weeks.
That's what we're doing. Yeah, and then we're going to come back.
And we'll be back.
So much weird stuff, I hope.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Hopefully a lot more guests.
Yeah.
We hope everyone has been enjoying the guests that we've had on.
Yes.
And stay tuned. Have a wonderful summer.
Yes.
Keep cool. Stay hydrated.
Wear sunscreen and a sun hat.
Yeah.
Okay, just
For Celine.
for me, please. All
Okay.
right, well, thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Love you. Bye.
Bye.